The first sound was a scream of metal, a violent, tearing shriek that ripped through the quiet afternoon. It was the sound of a world coming apart at the seams. Then came the shatter, not just one, but 100 small explosions of glass, like a chandelier dropped from a great height. They say your life flashes before your eyes in moments like these. They're wrong. There's no time for that. There's only the sound, the force, and the sudden, shocking realization that you are no longer in control. Through the chaos, I heard his voice, not my name. He didn't scream my name. He screamed, "Chloe, no." And then, there was only silence, a thick, heavy silence that swallowed everything. But that was later. First, there was the sun. It was one of those rare Seattle mornings in late October when the city forgets itself. The persistent gray clouds had pulled back like a theater curtain, revealing a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Sunlight, rich and golden as honey, poured through the large picture window of our new house, painting long, warm stripes across the freshly polished hardwood floors. I stood in the middle of the living room, a mug of coffee warming my hands, and I breathed it all in. The scent of new paint, of sawdust, of lemon polish, and beneath it all, the faint, clean smell of the coming autumn. It was the smell of a beginning, our beginning. Every corner of this house was a decision I had made, a choice we had made together. As an interior designer, I saw the world in terms of structure, harmony, and potential. This house, when we first found it, was just a collection of rooms, good bones, as they say in the business, but no soul. I had given it one. I chose the soft, warm gray for the walls, the color of a dove's wing. I designed the built-in bookshelves that flanked the fireplace, imagining them filled with his books and, one day, the well-loved storybooks of our children. I had spent weeks finding the perfect light fixture for the dining area, a delicate cascade of hand-blown glass that looked like frozen drops of rain. Everything was in its place. Everything was perfect. My life, for the first time, felt like one of my designs, balanced, beautiful, and completely under control. I took a sip of my coffee and smiled. Today was my wedding day. In just a few hours, I would marry Julian Hayes, the man who had walked into my life 2 years ago and rearranged all my carefully planned furniture. He was a writer, a weaver of worlds, and he saw the poetry in things I only saw as practical. He loved the way my mind worked, the way I brought order to chaos, and I loved the way he brought a little bit of beautiful chaos to my order. He was the one variable I hadn't planned for, and the best thing that had ever happened to me. I heard the sound of his key in the lock, and my heart did a familiar little flutter. The front door opened and he stepped inside, his silhouette framed by the bright morning light. He was holding a ridiculous bouquet of wildflowers, daisies, black-eyed Susans, and some purple things I couldn't name. They were nothing like the elegant white calla lilies that were waiting at the venue, and that's why I loved them. For the bride, he said, his voice a low, warm rumble. He closed the door behind him and walked towards me, his smile making the whole room brighter. "They're beautiful," I said, my voice catching slightly. "But isn't it bad luck to see the bride on the morning of the wedding?" He closed the distance between us and gently took the coffee mug from my hand, placing it on the mantelpiece. Then he wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me close. "I've never believed in bad luck," he murmured, his lips close to my ear. "Only in good stories, and ours is just getting started." He kissed me then, a long, slow kiss that tasted of coffee and mint and the promise of forever. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, searched mine. "Are you happy, Ellie?" "Happy," I laughed, a real, bubbling laugh of pure joy. "Julian, happy isn't a big enough word. Everything is perfect." For a fleeting second, a shadow passed through his eyes. It was so quick I almost missed it. A flicker of something I couldn't name. Worry, guilt. But then it was gone, replaced by the warm, adoring gaze I knew so well. He was probably just nervous, We both were. It was a big day. Good, he said, his smile returning. Perfect is what you deserve. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I glanced over and saw Sarah's name flash on the screen. I smiled and picked it up. Speak of the devil. You better not be calling to tell me you've changed your mind. Sarah's voice boomed through the speaker, as blunt and cheerful as the woman herself. Because I did not spend 3 hours steaming the wrinkles out of this bridesmaid dress, just for you to get cold feet. I laughed, leaning back against the counter. No cold feet here. Just enjoying the calm before the storm. Good. So, how's the groom? Is he a nervous wreck yet? Did you have to talk him off a ledge? I looked over at Julian, who was now carefully arranging the wildflowers in a glass vase. He looked completely at ease, humming a little tune under his breath. He seems to be holding up remarkably well. I said, well, don't let him get too comfortable. Sarah warned playfully. Just checking in. I'll see you at the venue in a couple of hours. I love you. L. I love you too. Sar. I hung up just as the doorbell rang. Julian and I exchanged a confused look. We weren't expecting anyone. I walked over and opened the door to find Liam Chen standing on our doorstep. My best friend from work, and one of the kindest, steadiest people I knew. He was holding a small, beautifully wrapped box. Liam, what are you doing here? I asked, surprised. Sorry to drop by unannounced, he said, his smile a little shy. I just wanted to give you this before all the madness started. A little something for the house. You shouldn't have, I said, but I was touched. I opened the door wider. Come in for a second. I can't stay. Just wanted to see you, he said. He handed me the gift. His fingers brushed against mine, and there was a warmth in his touch that was different from Julian's. It was solid, comforting, like an old oak tree. His eyes met mine, and in them, I saw a deep, genuine affection. It was the look of a friend who truly wished me all the happiness in the world. Congratulations, Ellie. Really. Thank you, Liam. That means a lot. He gave a small nod, his gaze flicking for a moment to Julian, who was watching us from the kitchen. Then he looked back at me. I'll see you at the church. He turned and walked down the path without another word. I closed the door, a warm feeling spreading through my chest. I was so lucky to be surrounded by such good people. What was that? Julian asked, his tone carefully neutral. Just Liam, dropping off a gift. I placed the box on the entryway table. That was sweet of him. Yeah, Julian said, turning his attention back to the flowers. Sweet. I walked back into the living room, feeling the hum of anticipation building inside me. It was real. This was all real. I was standing in our forever home, hours away from marrying the love of my life. My carefully designed world was finally complete. I ran my hand along the smooth, cool marble of the fireplace mantel, a feeling of deep contentment settling over me. That's when Julian's phone, which was lying face down on the counter, began to vibrate. It wasn't a loud, insistent ring, but a low, urgent buzz. I saw the change in him immediately. His shoulders tensed. The easy smile he'd been wearing a moment ago vanished. He glanced at the phone, then at me, his expression unreadable. Aren't you going to get that? I asked. No, it's nothing, he said, a little too quickly. He reached over and flipped the phone over, silencing the vibration. Probably just my publisher again, hounding me about the new manuscript. She has the worst timing. Oh, I felt a tiny prickle of unease, a dissonant note in the morning's perfect symphony. The shadow was back in his eyes, stronger this time. It looked like fear. Hey, he said, walking over to me and taking my hands in his. He squeezed them gently. Don't let me distract you. Today is about us. No editors. No publishers, no interruptions, just you and me. He leaned in and kissed my forehead, his lips warm against my skin. I'm going to go get ready. I'll meet you at the church. And Ellie, yeah, I love you more than words can say. I watched him walk out the door, the bouquet of wildflowers standing brightly on the counter. His words should have reassured me, but the tiny seed of doubt had been planted. I told myself it was just pre-wedding jitters. Nerves. It was normal. I took a deep breath, forcing the feeling down. I wouldn't let anything spoil this day. I walked over to the window and looked out at the sun-drenched street. Everything was fine. Everything was perfect. I repeated the word to myself, over and over again, as if saying it enough times could make it true. Perfect. 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 I held onto that word like a shield, not knowing that in just a few short hours, it would be the first thing to shatter. The car was a 1957 Porsche Speedster, a beautiful anachronism in a city of electric cars and SUVs. It was Julian's one extravagant demand for the wedding. We have to drive to our future in something classic. Ellie, he'd said. Something with a story. It was ridiculously impractical, painted a gleaming silver that hurt your eyes in the sunlight, with worn leather seats that smelled of history. And I loved it. I smoothed down the silk of my dress for the 10th time. It was a simple, elegant design. Classic like the car. No lace. No beads. Just clean lines that fell perfectly. I had designed it myself, sketching it out one night when I couldn't sleep, long before he'd even proposed. I'd always known what my wedding dress would look like, just as I'd known what my life would look like. Julian was driving, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He'd changed into his tuxedo, and he looked impossibly handsome, like a movie star from a bygone era. But the tension I'd seen in him that morning had returned, settling into the lines round his mouth. He kept glancing at his phone, which he'd propped up in the center console, ostensibly for navigation, though we both knew the way to the church by heart. "You seem distracted," I said, trying to keep my voice light. He jolted slightly, as if my words had pulled him from a trance. He turned to me and forced a smile. "Sorry, just thinking." "About what?" I reached over and placed my hand on his arm. His muscles were rigid beneath the fine wool of his jacket. "Last-minute jitters?" "Something like that," he said, his eyes flicking back to the road. "Just thinking about everything. US, the house, the life we're about to build. It's a lot. It's a good lot," I said softly. I traced the line of his jaw with my finger. "We built this, Julian. We designed it. It's going to be strong." He turned his hand over and laced his fingers with mine. His palm was clammy. "I know," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I know you're right." We drove in silence for a few minutes, the purr of the engine filling the space between us. I tried to focus on the feeling of his hand in mine, on the warmth of the sun on my face. This was supposed to be the happiest drive of my life. Why did it feel like we were driving into a storm? "Remember that trip to the coast?" I asked, trying to pull him back to me, back to a memory that was solid and safe. Our first trip together, when we stayed in that tiny cabin and it rained the whole time. A genuine smile finally touched his lips, and we spent 3 days just reading and talking and drinking bad wine. "It was the best wine I've ever had," I corrected him. "We finished your first draft of the novel on that trip. I knew then. I knew you were going to be a star. You were my biggest believer," he said, squeezing my hand. "You still are. Always." I promised, and I meant it. I believed in his talent, in his heart, in us. My belief was the foundation of the world I had so carefully constructed. We turned onto a quieter street, a long, tree-lined road that led up the hill towards the old stone church where our friends and family were waiting. The autumn leaves were a riot of color: crimson, gold, and fiery orange. It was picturesque, a perfect backdrop for a perfect day. Julian's phone buzzed. Just once. A short, sharp notification. His eyes darted down to the screen. I saw his jaw clench. He didn't say anything, but the air in the car thickened, growing heavy with unspoken words. The easy moment we'd shared was gone, shattered by that single, electronic sound. "Who was that?" I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. "No one," he said, shaking his head. "Spam. It's always spam." He reached down and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat floor, a gesture meant to be dismissive, final, but it felt performative, an act. We were approaching an intersection, a four-way stop in a quiet, residential neighborhood. The road was empty. Julian slowed the Porsche, but he seemed agitated, his focus completely fractured. He was looking in the rearview mirror, his brow furrowed. "Julian," I said, a knot of real fear beginning to twist in my stomach. "What's wrong?" He didn't answer. And then I saw it. A car, a dark green sedan, was coming down the cross street to our right. It was moving too fast. It wasn't slowing for the stop sign. It was accelerating. Time seemed to warp, stretching and slowing like taffy. My mind registered a series of disconnected details. The determined, almost frantic expression on the face of the driver. A woman, her dark hair flying around her face. The way the sunlight glinted off the hood of her car as it hurtled towards us. My first thought was a strange one. Her car is the exact same color as the accent wall in our study. My second thought was Julian's name. I opened my mouth to scream it, but he was already in motion. And what he did next would be seared into my memory forever. A perfect, horrific tableau of betrayal. He didn't pull me closer. He didn't throw his arm in front of me. He didn't try to swerve or brace for the impact on my side of the car. He turned towards me, but his eyes were looking past me, through the passenger window, at the oncoming car. His expression was one of pure, unadulterated terror, but it wasn't for me. In that split second before the world exploded, he did two things simultaneously. He shouted a name, her name, Chloe, and he shoved me. It wasn't a gentle push. It was a violent, desperate act. He threw his weight against me, his hands slamming into my shoulder, propelling me hard against the passenger door. His body, the body I loved and trusted, became a weapon against me. He used me as leverage, a counterweight, as he twisted his own body away from me and towards the center of the car, shielding himself, putting as much distance as possible between himself and the point of impact on my side. In that final, horrifying moment, I understood. He wasn't saving me. He was sacrificing me. He was trying to save himself from me, from the collision that was about to happen on my side of the car, the side closest to her. Then came the impact. The sound was deafening, a brutal crunch of metal folding in on itself. The world became a kaleidoscope of spinning trees and sky and shattered glass. My head slammed against the window with sickening force. The beautiful vintage car, the symbol of our story, was crushed, violated. My simple, elegant dress was now just a piece of fabric in a metal cage. And then, as quickly as it began, it was over. The car shuddered to a stop, tilted at a grotesque angle. The engine hissed, a dying breath. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burnt rubber and something metallic and sweet that might have been blood. My ears were ringing. A sharp, piercing pain shot through my shoulder where Julian had pushed me, and my head throbbed in time with my frantic heartbeat. But I was alive. I was conscious. I slowly turned my head, my neck screaming in protest. The driver's side was relatively untouched. Julian was slumped against the steering wheel, but he was moving, groaning. He lifted his head. He didn't look at me. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't even seem to register that I was there. His eyes, wide with a panic I had never seen before, were fixed on the other car. The green sedan was crumpled against a large oak tree on the corner, steam pouring from its mangled hood. The driver's side door was crushed inward, through the spiderweb of cracks in our windshield. I could see her, the woman with the dark, flying hair. She was slumped over the steering wheel, motionless. Chloe. Julian fumbled with his seatbelt, his hands shaking. Chloe. He whispered, the name a prayer, an agony. He finally wrenched his door open and stumbled out of the car. He didn't glance back at me, not even for a second. He staggered, then ran, towards her car. I sat there, frozen in the wreckage of our perfect day. The pain in my head was a dull, distant roar. The real pain was a cold, sharp blade twisting in my chest. It wasn't the crash that hurt. It was the choice, the instinctive, split-second, undeniable choice he had made. He had pushed me away to save himself. He had screamed her name, and he was running to her now, leaving me behind in the ruins. The beautiful design of my life hadn't just cracked. It had been violently, deliberately demolished, and the architect of its destruction was the one man I thought was helping me build it. I stared through the shattered glass, watching him try to pry her door open, and I knew, with a certainty that was colder and harder than any fact I had ever known, that nothing would ever be perfect again. The world came back into focus under the relentless glare of a fluorescent light. It hummed a low, monotonous tune, a soundtrack for purgatory. The first thing I became aware of was the smell, a sterile, chemical sharpness of antiseptic that failed to cover the underlying scent of sickness and fear. A hospital. I was in a hospital. A woman in blue scrubs was leaning over me, her voice soft and distant, like she was speaking from the other end of a long tunnel. "Eleanor, can you hear me? You've been in an accident. You're going to be okay. Just a mild concussion and some bruising. You were very lucky." Lucky. The word echoed in the numb, empty space in my mind. I tried to sit up, but a bolt of pain shot through my shoulder, and I fell back against the starchy pillow with a gasp. The memory of the crash came flooding back, not as a coherent sequence, but as a series of brutal, vivid snapshots. The green car, the woman's face, Julian's hands shoving me, his voice screaming her name. "Where is he?" I asked, my own voice a dry, scratchy whisper. "My fiancé, Julian. Where is he?" "He's here," the nurse said, her smile professionally kind. "He's been very worried. He's just speaking with the doctor. He'll be right back." As if on cue, the door to the small cubicle slid open and Julian rushed in. He looked terrible. His hair was a mess. His tuxedo jacket was rumpled, and there was a small cut on his forehead he seemed unaware of. His eyes, wild and bloodshot, landed on me, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of what looked like relief, but it was quickly replaced by something else. A frantic, hunted look. "Ellie, oh my God. Ellie, are you okay?" He rushed to my bedside, grabbing my hand. His skin was cold and damp. I was so scared. "The doctor told me you were awake." I stared at him, at the man I was supposed to have married an hour ago. I searched his face for the person I knew, the man who brought me wildflowers and read poetry to me in bed. But I couldn't find him. All I could see were his hands on my shoulder. All I could hear was Chloe's name. "Why did you push me?" The question came out flat, devoid of the agony that was ripping me apart inside. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. "What? No. Ellie. It all happened so fast. I didn't push you. I was trying to, I don't know, shield you, brace myself. It was just instinct. A stupid, panicked reflex. I don't even know what I was doing." His words were a frantic scramble, tumbling over each other in their haste to build a new reality. One where he wasn't a coward. One where he hadn't chosen her over me. But it was shoddy construction. The lies were weak. The foundation non-existent. "You shouted her name," I said, my voice still quiet, still numb. "The woman in the other car. You knew her." He dropped my hand and started pacing the small space, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "No. I didn't. I've seen her around. Maybe. At a coffee shop? I don't know. In a moment like that, you just yell. It didn't mean anything. Ellie, I swear to you." A doctor appeared at the doorway, a tired-looking man with a clipboard. "Mr. Hayes." Julian spun around. "Yes. Is there any news?" The desperation in his voice was raw, undisguised. It was a voice he had not used for me. "The other driver, Ms. Reed, is stable for now," the doctor said, his tone measured. "She has a broken arm and some internal bruising. We're keeping her for observation. We need you to come fill out some more paperwork." "Of course." Right away, Julian turned back to me, his face a mask of strained apology. Ellie, I'll be right back. I have to deal with this. The police will want a statement. And she has no one else here. He was gone before I could respond. I watched him go, his steps quick and purposeful, hurrying towards the woman he'd called a stranger. The nurse came back in to check my vitals. She smiled at me again. He really cares about you, she said. He hasn't left her side. I must have looked confused, because she clarified. His sister. The poor thing. It's a miracle anyone survived. His sister. The lie was so audacious, so utterly shameless, that for a moment, all I could do was stare. He had built a story, a plausible fiction for the hospital staff, to justify his concern, to allow him to stay close to her. The sheer premeditation of it sent a chill through me. That had nothing to do with the shock of the accident. Just then, the curtain was ripped aside and Sarah burst in, her face pale with fright, her eyes blazing with anger. She was still in her lavender bridesmaid dress, a stark contrast to the sterile white of the room. She took one look at me, and her expression softened into one of overwhelming concern. Ellie, oh, honey. She rushed to my side, carefully avoiding my bruised shoulder as she wrapped her arms around me. I leaned into her, and for the first time, I felt the dam of my numbness begin to crack. A single, hot tear escaped and traced a path down my cheek. I'm okay, I whispered, though it felt like the biggest lie I'd ever told. The hell you are, she said, her voice fierce. She pulled back, her lawyerly gaze sweeping over me, assessing the damage. Where is he? Where is that bastard Julian? He's filling out paperwork, I said, the words tasting like ash. For the other driver. Sarah's eyes narrowed. What the hell happened? Ellie, the message I got just said there was a crash. I opened my mouth to tell her, to explain the push, the name, the lie about the sister, but I couldn't. Saying it out loud would make it irrevocably real, a truth I couldn't take back or redesign. Before I could form the words, Julian came back into the room. He stopped short when he saw Sarah. A look of guilt, sharp and clear, flashed across his face. Sarah, he said, his voice strained. You're here. Of course I'm here. She snapped, her hands on her hips. Where else would I be? My best friend is in the hospital on her wedding day. The real question is, where have you been? I was dealing with the police, with the hospital staff. There's a lot to sort out, he said, his eyes avoiding hers. He walked over to the chair in the corner and shrugged off his tuxedo jacket, tossing it carelessly. It's a nightmare. A nightmare? Sarah's voice was dangerously low. Tell me something. Julian, what kind of reflex makes you shove your future wife towards an oncoming car? She must have spoken to one of the first responders, a witness. She knew. Julian's face went white. That's not what happened. It was chaos. I was trying to protect her. That's a lie, Sarah said, her voice cutting through the air like glass. You know it, and I know it, and I think, deep down, Ellie knows it too. The two of them stood locked in a standoff, a silent war being waged over my hospital bed. I felt small, broken, a prize to be claimed by the winning argument. A nurse called Julian's name from the hallway. Mr. Hayes, the doctor needs to speak with you again about Ms. Reed's condition. I'm coming. He called back, his relief at the interruption palpable. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. Ellie, we'll talk about this. We'll sort it out. I promise. I need to go. He rushed out again, leaving his jacket behind on the chair. Silence descended on the room, thick and suffocating. Sarah sat on the edge of my bed, taking my hand gently. Talk to me. Elle, what aren't you telling me? I just shook my head, unable to speak. The truth was a stone in my throat. And then, on the chair in the corner, a small screen lit up. It was Julian's phone, inside his jacket pocket. It lit up once, then again, a third time. I stared at it, It felt like a malevolent presence in the room. A black box containing the answers I was terrified to find. Sarah followed my gaze. "Don't," she said softly. "Don't do it to yourself." But I couldn't stop. It was a compulsion. I needed to know. I needed to see the blueprint of this disaster. Slowly, I pushed myself up, ignoring the pain in my shoulder. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and walked, unsteadily, to the chair. I reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the phone. The screen was locked, but the notifications were right there, glowing in the dim light. 3 new messages. Not from an editor. Not from his mother. They were from a contact named simply C. The first one read, "You can't do this to us. Julian. You can't just throw this away." The second, "I won't let you. I'm not going to just disappear." And then the third, the one that made the air leave my lungs in a silent scream. The one that confirmed everything my heart had been trying to deny. "I can't live without you. Julian. I'm on my way there." The phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the linoleum floor. The sound was small, insignificant, but it was the sound of my world ending. The numbness was gone, washed away by a wave of icy, horrifying clarity. It wasn't an accident. It was a confrontation. She had been coming for him, coming for us, and in the moment of truth, when he was forced to choose between his carefully constructed future and his chaotic, secret passion, he hadn't even hesitated. It wasn't a crack in the foundation. I had seen the plans. The foundation was never there at all. It was all a facade, a beautiful, hollow design, and I had been living inside it, believing it was home. The days that followed were a blur of muted colors and muffled sounds. I left the hospital with Sarah, not with Julian. I went to her apartment, a small, cluttered space that felt more like a sanctuary than the pristine, empty house I was supposed to call home. I moved through the motions of living. I showered. I ate the soup Sarah placed in front of me. I answered the concerned calls from my family with vague, reassuring phrases. Just a little shaken up. "We're postponing, not canceling. Everything's fine." Each word was a lie, a carefully placed brick in the new wall I was building around myself. Julian called. He called a dozen times a day. He sent long, rambling texts filled with apologies and excuses. He said Chloe finally used her name was an old friend who had become unstable. He said she was obsessed with him, that he'd been trying to end things for months, but he was afraid of what she might do. He painted himself as the victim, trapped between a woman he loved me and a woman he pitied. "He's gaslighting you, Ellie," Sarah said, her voice sharp as she read one of the texts over my shoulder. "He's turning himself into the hero of a tragedy he created. Don't you see it?" I saw it, but seeing it and accepting it were two different things. A part of me, a desperate, foolish part, wanted to believe him. It was easier to believe in a complicated mistake than in a simple, devastating betrayal. Believing him meant that the last 2 years of my life weren't a complete waste. It meant the man I loved still existed somewhere beneath this mess. He begged to see me. He said he couldn't explain everything over the phone. He needed to look me in the eyes. Against Sarah's vehement objections, I agreed. I needed to see him, too. I needed to look into his eyes and find the truth for myself. We met at a small, anonymous coffee shop halfway between Sarah's apartment and our house. It was raining, a classic Seattle drizzle that coated the city in a slick, gray sheen. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a table in the corner, looking pale and haggard. He stood up when he saw me, his hands fidgeting with a sugar packet. "Ellie," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for coming." I didn't say anything. I just sat down and waited. He launched into his story, his voice low and earnest. He spoke of Chloe Reed, the photographer, his old friend. He described their connection as something volatile and artistic, a flame that had burned too brightly and then turned destructive. He claimed he had ended it months ago, but she couldn't let go. The texts, the phone calls, her appearance on our wedding day, it was all the desperate act of a woman on the edge, I was trying to protect you from her. From all of this, he said, reaching across the table for my hand. I pulled it away. The crash, when I saw her car. I just panicked. I was so afraid of what she would do, of the scene she would make. I wasn't thinking. I swear it. I watched him, studying his face, his pleading eyes, the way his jaw tightened when he mentioned her name. He was a good writer. He was an even better storyteller. He had crafted a narrative that was almost believable. Almost. So you've never lied to me? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. No, never. I hid this from you. Yes, and that was wrong. I was a coward. But I never lied about my feelings for you. You are the woman I want to spend my life with. The words were right. The delivery was perfect. But the foundation was flawed. He was a designer, too. A designer of fictions. And I was finally starting to see the seams. Then what about the trip to Portland? I asked. He froze. The color drained from his face. What trip? The one in August. I said, keeping my gaze level. You told me you were going to a writers' conference. I remember, because I was working on that big project downtown and I couldn't go with you. You were gone for 3 days. I was at the conference. Ellie, were you? I opened my purse and took out my phone. I slid it across the table to him. The screen was open to a photo. It was a picture of him and Chloe, standing in front of a famous Portland landmark, the Keep Portland Weird mural. They were laughing. His arm was wrapped tightly around her waist. She was looking up at him with an expression of pure adoration. It was a selfie, clearly taken by her. I had found it on a hidden social media account, a private world meant only for them, filled with pictures and inside jokes and declarations of love. It wasn't the profile of a stalker. It was the profile of a girlfriend. Julian stared at the photo, his mouth opening and closing silently. The story he had so carefully constructed crumbled into dust. There were no more words, no more excuses. There was only this one, irrefutable image. It wasn't a mistake, was it? Julian, I said, the cold truth finally settling into my bones. It wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a double life. You had a whole other life with her. He couldn't look at me. He just stared at his own smiling face on the screen. A ghost from a life I never knew existed. Ellie, I can explain. No, I said, and the word felt powerful. Final. You can't. There's no design you can create that will fix this. There's no story you can tell that will make this okay. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. The few other patrons in the coffee shop looked over. I didn't care. For the first time, I didn't care about making a scene. I loved you, I said, my voice breaking for the first time. The man I thought you were, but he doesn't exist. He was just a character in one of your stories. I walked out of the coffee shop, leaving him there with the evidence of his lies. The rain was coming down harder now, cold and relentless. I didn't have an umbrella, but I didn't feel the rain. I felt strangely hollowed out, as if the part of me that had loved him, the part that had believed in our perfect future, had been surgically removed, leaving a clean, empty space behind. The shock was finally wearing off, replaced by a slow-burning anger. It wasn't just that he had cheated. It was the scale of the deception, the meticulous care he had taken to maintain his two worlds. The trips, the gifts, the secret language of their relationship that had been happening right under my nose. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had made a fool of me. He had allowed me to pour my heart and soul into designing a future that, for him, was just one of two options. I went back to our house that evening. I had to. I couldn't live in the limbo of Sarah's guest room forever. I needed my things. I needed to face the space we had created and officially declare it dead. The house was dark and silent when I let myself in. The air was stale, filled with the ghost of a happy morning that now felt like a lifetime ago. The ridiculous bouquet of wildflowers Julian had brought me was sitting on the counter, the blossoms already starting to wilt. I picked up the vase and, with a sudden surge of rage, I threw it into the sink. It shattered, the sound echoing in the silent house. I walked through the rooms, a stranger in my own home. Every object was a memory, and every memory was now tainted. The couch where we'd cuddled and watched movies. The kitchen where we'd tried, and failed, to bake bread from scratch. The bedroom, our sanctuary, now felt like a crime scene. I went into his office, the room he called his creative space. Books were piled everywhere, notes for his new novel scattered across his desk. My eyes landed on a small, leather-bound journal sitting next to his laptop. It was a new one. I knew I shouldn't. It was an invasion of privacy. But privacy felt like a luxury I could no longer afford. My entire life had been invaded. My hands trembled as I opened it. His familiar, messy handwriting filled the pages. It wasn't notes for his book. It was about her. It was all about her. He wrote about her passion, her wildness, how she made him feel alive. He called her his muse. He wrote about the guilt he felt, the love he had for me, but described it as a different kind of love, a comfortable love, a safe love. He wrote about being torn, about wanting to completely different lives at the same time. And then I found the last entry, dated the night before our wedding. Tomorrow, I make a choice. I marry Ellie and choose the good, stable life I'm supposed to want, the life of a respectable man. Or I tell her the truth and choose the fire, the chaos, the art, the life of a writer. I know what I should do. I'm just not sure I'm strong enough to do it. Gone. I wish Chloe would just let me go. Or I wish she would save me. He didn't make a choice. She made it for him. By crashing into our car, she had saved him from having to be the villain. She had turned him into a tragic figure caught in the crossfire. A wave of nausea washed over me. I closed the journal, my fingers stained with the ink of his betrayal. This was so much worse than I had imagined. I wasn't just the safe choice. I was the obstacle. I was the respectable life standing in the way of his art, his passion, his fire. My perfect, well-designed world wasn't a home to him. It was a cage. The anger that had been simmering inside me finally boiled over. It was a clean, white-hot rage that burned away the last remnants of my grief and confusion. I was no longer a victim in his story. I was a character who was about to go off script. The house, our house, suddenly felt like an extension of his lies. Every carefully chosen paint color and piece of furniture a part of the set he'd built. And I felt an overwhelming urge to tear it all down. I didn't smash things. That wasn't my style. My response was colder, more precise, more like a demolition than a tantrum. I started in his office. I took his precious journal and every loose page of notes, and I methodically fed them into the shredder, the machines whirring a satisfying counterpoint to the silence of the house. I took the framed photo of us from his desk and replaced it with the printout of him and Chloe in Portland. I left it right in the center, where he couldn't miss it. I moved through the house like a ghost with a purpose. I packed my clothes, my books, my personal belongings, into boxes with a numb efficiency. With each item I packed, I felt a piece of myself being reclaimed. I was excavating my life from the ruins of his. When I got to the bedroom, I stripped the bed of the expensive linens we had picked out together. I folded them neatly and placed them in a donation bag. I would not sleep in that bed again. As I worked, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My heart lurched, assuming it was Julian using a friend's phone. But the message wasn't from him. It read, "I thank you and I need to talk. We have more in common than you think." There was no signature, but I knew. It was from her, Chloe. My first instinct was to block the number, to delete the message and pretend it never existed. What could she possibly have to say to me? But a different instinct, a colder, more curious one, took over. He had told his story. I had found my own version of the truth in his journal. But there was a third narrative, one I hadn't heard yet, the one from the woman he called his muse. What was her version of the story? Was she a villain, a victim, or something else entirely? My pain had calcified into a hard, sharp resolve. I was no longer afraid of the truth. I wanted to see it from every angle, to understand the full architecture of my life's collapse. I texted back a single word, where? She sent an address, a photography gallery downtown. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. The next day, I felt a strange sense of calm as I walked into the gallery. It was a stark, white space, the kind of place where every sound echoed. Photographs lined the walls, large, dramatic black and white prints. They were beautiful, filled with a raw, chaotic energy. They were pictures of windswept coastlines, abandoned factories, and portraits of people who looked like they had lived hard lives. They were her pictures. She was standing at the far end of the gallery, her back to me, staring at a massive photograph of a dead tree, its branches like skeletal fingers reaching for a stormy sky. Her arm was in a sling, a stark white line against her black sweater. She turned as I approached, and for the first time, I was face to face with the woman who had haunted my life. She wasn't what I expected. In the photos with Julian, she had looked wild and free. In person, she looked small and fragile. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her face was pale. She looked broken. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice quiet. "I'm not here for you," I said, my tone flat. "I'm here for me. I want to understand what I was living in the middle of." A flicker of something respect, maybe, passed through her eyes. "Fair enough," she said. She gestured to the photographs around us. "This is my current exhibition. It's called Beautiful Rex." A bitter, self-aware smile touched her lips. "Seems appropriate, doesn't it?" I didn't respond. I wasn't here to trade ironic pleasantries. "He told you I was obsessed, didn't he?" she asked, getting straight to the point. "That I was unstable, that he was trying to end it. That was the general idea," I said. She let out a short, humorless laugh. "Of course it was. That's Julian. He writes the most beautiful fictions, especially the ones about himself." She began to walk slowly through the gallery, and I followed, keeping a careful distance. She started to talk, not looking at me, but at her photographs, as if telling the story to them. She told me about how they met, 1.5 years ago, at a poetry reading. She told me about their instant connection, a meeting of two artistic souls who felt misunderstood by the world. She spoke of his complaints about his new novel, how he felt stuck, uninspired. He told me he was in a relationship, she said, stopping in front of a photo of a rusted, broken-down car in a field of weeds. But he said it was comfortable, safe. He said you were a good person, but that you didn't understand the darker, more complicated parts of him, the parts a writer needs. My hands clenched into fists. To hear my love, my support, my stable home, described as an anchor holding him back, was a unique kind of pain. He told me he was going to leave you, she continued, her voice gaining a harder edge. He promised me, for months, just let me get the book proposal finished. Just let us get the house sale closed. Just let me find the right time. It was always just one more thing. She turned to face me then, her eyes dark and intense. I loved him. I believed him. I put my entire life on hold for him, waiting for him to be the man he promised he would be. I was the one who pushed him to finish his manuscript. I was the one who read his drafts at 3 a.m. I was his muse, his partner, his secret, and he was going to marry you. The pieces clicked into place. The final text message. I'm on my way there. The crash. It wasn't just a desperate act of a woman trying to stop a wedding. It was a final, terrible gamble. The accident. I said, the words barely a whisper. You did it on purpose. She didn't deny it. She just looked down at her broken arm. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I had to stop it. I had to force a choice. I thought if I showed up, if he saw me, he would finally have to pick a side. I guess he did, didn't he? He chose to lie to everyone. I stared at her, this woman who had been my faceless rival, and I saw something I never expected to see, a reflection of myself. We were on opposite sides of the same counterfeit coin. He had sold us both a story we wanted to believe. To me, he was the romantic artist who needed my steady hand. To her, He was the trapped genius who needed her wild spirit to set him free. He had designed his life to have both. And in the end, he was loyal to neither of us. He was only loyal to the story he was writing for himself. Why are you telling me all this? I asked. Because he's going to try and fix it with you, she said, her voice filled with a weary certainty. He'll tell you I was a mistake, that you're the one he really wants. He'll promise you the world, and you might even believe him, because you've invested so much, because the alternative is admitting that everything was a lie, and he'll do just enough to keep you. And then he'll find another muse, because it's not about you or me, Eleanor. It's about him. He needs the conflict. He needs the drama. He thinks it makes him a better writer. Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. She was right. He fed on the chaos he created. Our pain was just fuel for his art. I saw you at the coffee shop with him yesterday, she admitted. I was parked across the street. I saw the look on your face when you walked out. It was the same look I've had on my face for the last 6 months. And I realized he shouldn't get away with it. He shouldn't get to just walk away from this wreckage and write a poignant novel about it. A strange, unspoken alliance formed between us in the silent, white gallery. We were not friends. We would never be friends. But we were the two sole survivors of the same shipwreck. And we understood each other in a way no one else could. We had both loved a ghost. I left the gallery feeling different. The anger was still there, but it was sharper now, more focused. It was no longer just about the personal betrayal. It was about the profound injustice of it all. Julian was counting on me to be the good person, to be quiet, to be dignified, to handle my pain privately so he could manage the fallout. He was counting on me to play the role he had written for me. I went back to the house, not to pack, but to wait. I knew he would come. He would have seen his trashed office, seen the photograph, and he would come to spin one last, desperate tale. I sat on the bare mattress in the master bedroom, the room feeling cavernous and cold without our things. I sat in the dark, and I waited for the final act. The sound of his key in the lock was hesitant, uncertain. It was no longer the confident sound of a man entering his own home. The front door creaked open, and he called my name into the darkness. Ellie, are you here? I didn't answer. I just sat on the bare mattress, a silent sentinel in the ruins of our life. I heard his footsteps, slow and cautious, as he walked through the house. I heard his sharp intake of breath when he must have entered his office and seen the shredded remains of his journal, the photograph of him and Chloe sitting in the place where my picture used to be. I heard him walk from room to room, discovering the empty closets, the bare shelves, the neat stacks of boxes that contained my life, separate from his. Finally, he appeared in the bedroom doorway, a dark silhouette against the faint light from the hallway. Ellie, he said, his voice strained. What is this? What have you done? I flicked on the bedside lamp. The sudden light made him squint. He looked exhausted, defeated. The charming, confident writer was gone, replaced by a cornered man who had run out of stories. I'm redesigning the space, I said, my voice as cold and clear as glass, getting rid of the things that no longer work. He took a step into the room, his eyes scanning the bare walls, the empty surfaces. This is insane. You're just going to throw everything away because of one mistake. One mistake. I laughed. A sharp, ugly sound that held no humor. Was Portland a mistake? Julian, was the secret apartment you rented for her downtown a mistake? Was the journal full of poetry about your tortured love a mistake? Which mistake are we talking about? Exactly. You're going to have to be more specific. I had found the rental agreement for the apartment while packing. Another secret tucked away in a file labeled research. Another part of his fiction. He flinched at each revelation, each piece of his secret life I threw at him. He looked like a man being physically struck. You went through my things. You went through my life. I countered, my voice rising. You took 2 years of my love, my trust, my support, and you used it as a stable backdrop so you could play out your tragic artist fantasy. Don't you dare talk to me about privacy. It wasn't like that, he pleaded. taking another step closer. It was complicated. I loved you. I still love you. What I had with Chloe, it was an escape. It was a symptom of the pressure I was under, the block I was facing with my writing. It wasn't real. Not like us. Not real. I stood up from the bed, my body thrumming with a righteous energy. It was real enough for you to choose her. In that car, when you had a split second to act, you chose her. You pushed me out of the way and you screamed her name. That was the only real thing you've done in months. Julian. The one moment you didn't have time to write a better story. Tears welled in his eyes. They were real tears. I was sure of it. But I didn't know who he was crying for. For me. For her. Or for himself. For the perfect, two-sided world he had lost. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice breaking. Ellie, I am so sorry. I was a fool. I was weak. Let me fix this. Please. We can get through this. We can rebuild. He was reaching for the one thing he thought I couldn't resist, a project. A broken thing to fix. He knew me so well. Or at least, he knew the me I used to be. There's nothing to rebuild, I said. The foundation was a lie. The whole structure is compromised. The only thing to do is demolish it. Don't say that, he begged, his voice cracking. He sank to his knees in front of me, grabbing my hands. His touch felt alien, repulsive. I'll do anything. I will end it with her. For good. I will go to therapy. I will spend the rest of my life making this up to you. Don't leave me, Ellie. Please. I can't write without you. You're my home. His words, which once would have melted my heart, now turned it to stone. I can't write without you. He wasn't begging for me, the woman. He was begging for his anchor, his stability, his safe love. Chloe was right. It was all just fuel for him. And then, as if on cue, the doorbell rang. A sharp, insistent sound that cut through the emotionally charged air of the bedroom. Julian and I both froze. We looked at each other, and in his eyes, I saw a new wave of sheer panic. Don't answer that, he whispered, his grip on my hands tightening. But I knew. My conversation with Chloe had been a prelude. This was the main event. She had forced a choice once. Now it was my turn. I pulled my hands from his grasp. I think we have a visitor. I walked out of the bedroom, my steps steady and sure. I walked down the hall, through the living room filled with ghosts, and I opened the front door. Chloe was standing on the porch, her face pale in the dim light, her arm still in its sling. Her eyes weren't looking at me. They were looking past me, into the house, searching for him. Chloe, I said, my voice even. What a surprise. Julian appeared behind me, his face a mask of horror. What are you doing here? He hissed at her. I told you to stay away. You told me a lot of things. Julian, she said, her voice trembling but defiant. I just came to see which story you were telling tonight. And there it was. The high-stakes confrontation he had written about in his journals. The stuff of literary drama. His two worlds, his muse and his home, colliding on his doorstep. He stood between us, trapped, the lies of both his lives closing in on him. This is between me and Ellie, he said to Chloe, trying to regain control. You need to leave. No, I said, turning to face him. She's right. This isn't just about you and me anymore. It's about the wreckage, and we're all standing in it. I looked from Julian's panicked face to Chloe's heartbroken one. For months, he had been the main character, the tortured artist at the center of the universe, and we had been his supporting cast, his Madonna and his whore, his stability and his chaos. He had controlled the narrative completely, but not anymore. You have to choose, Julian, Chloe said, her voice barely a whisper. Right here, right now. No more stories, no more lies. Who is it? He looked back and forth between us, his mouth opening and closing. No words came out. He was a writer who had run out of script. The silence stretched on, thick and unbearable. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for me to save him, to be the good. Sensible Ellie, and end this madness." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a toxic mix of desire and guilt. And in that moment of his pathetic, cowardly indecision, I made my own choice. "You don't have to," I said, my voice ringing out with a clarity that startled all of us. "Because I'm choosing for you." I looked at Julian, the man I had loved, the man who had been a stranger to me all along. "I'm choosing me." Then I turned my gaze to Chloe. I didn't feel anger or pity. I just felt a strange, sad sense of solidarity. "He's all yours," I said. "I hope you enjoy the story." I stepped back into the house, leaving them on the porch together, to broken pieces of his fictional world. I walked past Julian, who was staring at me in stunned disbelief. I didn't look at him. I walked to the stack of boxes by the wall, picked up the one with my most essential things, and walked back to the front door. I paused on the threshold and looked at them one last time. They were standing there, frozen, 2 feet apart, a universe of lies between them. They looked like the beautiful wrecks from her photographs. "I'm selling my half of the house," I said to Julian, my voice calm and businesslike. "My lawyer will be in touch." Then I walked out. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I walked down the path, got into my car, and drove away without a single glance in the rearview mirror. The rain had stopped. The sky was beginning to clear, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was the one writing the story. And this chapter was finally, mercifully, over. Leaving was one thing. Staying gone was another. The first few weeks were a disorienting haze of logistics and lawyers. I stayed with Sarah, sleeping on her lumpy but blessedly neutral sofa. She was my rock, a fierce guardian who screened my calls, made me endless cups of tea, and let me be silent for hours without demanding I feel better. Liam was my other anchor. He'd show up after work with takeout, not asking questions, just sitting with me while I pushed food around my plate, offering a quiet, steady presence that was more comforting than any words could be. Julian tried to reach me. Of course, he left desperate, pleading voicemails. He sent emails that were practically novellas, filled with self-flagellation and promises of a reformed future. I didn't listen to them. I didn't read them. I created a new folder in my inbox titled Fiction, and I moved them all there, unread. Seeing his name no longer caused a pang of grief, but a dull, weary ache, like probing a bruise that was already starting to heal. The house sold quickly. The market was hot, and it was, objectively, a beautiful house. The thought of another couple living there, building a real life within the walls I had designed for a fake one, should have been painful. Instead, it was a relief, a clean break. When I signed the final papers, I felt a physical weight lift from my shoulders. I was untethered, unmoored, and for the first time, it didn't feel terrifying. It felt like freedom, but freedom was a vast, empty room, and I had no idea how to furnish it. My entire 5-year plan, so meticulously designed, had been incinerated. I had my half of the money from the house, a respectable sum that gave me a cushion, but I had no direction. The thought of going back to my old job, of designing harmonious living spaces for happy couples, felt like a cruel joke. How could I create sanctuaries for others when my own had been a stage for such elaborate deceit? One afternoon, sitting in Sarah's apartment and staring out at the relentless Seattle gray, I realized I couldn't stay here. The city was haunted. Every street corner held a memory, every coffee shop a ghost. I needed a new landscape, literally and figuratively. On a whim, I booked a flight, not to a tropical paradise or a bustling European city, but to a place that felt quiet and elemental. I flew to Portland, Oregon, rented a car, and started driving south along the coast. I had no itinerary, no reservations, no plan. For the first time in my adult life, I was operating without a blueprint. The Oregon coast was wild and raw, a landscape of dramatic cliffs, churning gray sea, and ancient, moss-covered forests. It was the opposite of the balanced, curated beauty I had always sought. It was beautifully, unapologetically chaotic. It matched the inside of my head. I drove for days, stopping in small, forgotten towns with names like Cannon Beach and Manzanita. I stayed in cheap motels with faded floral bedspreads and a view of the parking lot. I ate at roadside diners, sitting alone in a booth, listening to the conversations of strangers. I walked for hours on deserted beaches, the wind whipping my hair, the salty spray cold on my face. The sheer, overwhelming power of the ocean made my own heartbreak feel small, manageable. The waves crashed and receded, a constant rhythm of destruction and renewal. It was a comfort. During the day, I felt a strange sense of peace, but the nights were harder. In the silence of the motel rooms, the memories would return, not just of the betrayal, but of the good times. Julian's laugh, the weight of his arm around me, the shared dreams that had felt so real. And I would allow myself to grieve for the man I thought I was marrying, for the life I had lost. I learned that healing wasn't a straight line. It was a spiral. Some days I felt strong and free. Other days I felt like I was right back in that hospital room, the world collapsing around me. And that was okay. One afternoon, I found myself in a small town nestled in a cove, a collection of weathered, cedar-shingled buildings huddled against the forest. A sign in the window of a real estate office caught my eye. It was a listing for a small plot of land, a quarter-acre on a bluff overlooking the ocean. The photo showed a patch of wild grass and a few gnarled pine trees, with the vast, gray Pacific stretching out to the horizon. The price was surprisingly, almost absurdly, low. I don't know what possessed me. It was the most illogical, unplanned thing I had ever done. But I walked into that real estate office. An hour later, I had made an offer. By the end of the week, with the money from the house sale, it was mine. Eleanor Vance, a woman who planned every detail of her life down to the thread count of her sheets, had just bought a patch of dirt on a cliff in a town where I knew no one. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating. I found a tiny cottage to rent in the town, a place so small you could see from one end to the other. It was old and creaky, and the plumbing was questionable, but it had a small porch where I could sit and listen to the ocean. And for the first time in a long time, I started to sketch. I wasn't designing for a client. I wasn't trying to create a harmonious space for a hypothetical family. I was designing for me. I started sketching a house for the land on the bluff. It wasn't a big house. It wasn't a perfect house. It was a house of glass and reclaimed wood, designed to embrace the wildness of the landscape, not tame it. It had huge windows to let in the stormy light, and a deep, covered porch for watching the rain. It had a fireplace for the cold nights and a small, efficient kitchen for one. The act of creation was healing. As I drew the lines of this new structure, I felt like I was drawing the new lines of my own life. I was taking the rubble of my past and using it to build a new foundation, one that was entirely my own. I wasn't designing a dream house. I was designing a shelter, a place to be safe, a place to be whole. I hired a local contractor, an old, grizzled man named Ben who had built half the houses in town. He looked at my designs, his weathered face skeptical. Lot of windows. He grunted. The wind gets pretty mean up on that bluff. I know, I said. I'm counting on it. He gave me a long look. Then a slow grin spread across his face. All right then, he said. Let's build your storm watching house. The work was slow and arduous. I was there every day, not just as the designer, but as a laborer. I learned how to mix concrete, how to frame a wall, how to use a power saw. The physical work was a balm for my bruised soul. It left me too exhausted at the end of the day to ruminate on the past. My hands, once accustomed to fabric swatches and color palettes, became calloused and strong. I was building something real, something tangible, with my own two hands. I rarely spoke to Sarah or Liam, just short texts to let them know I was alive and, surprisingly, okay. I needed this time, this isolation, to figure out who I was when I wasn't part of a we. One evening, as the frame of the house was finally going up, a silhouette against the fiery sunset. Ben handed me a cold beer. We sat on the tailgate of his truck, looking at our work. "You know," he said, not looking at me, "this town's full of people running from something. Most of them just keep running. You're the first one I've seen in a long time who decided to stop and build a wall, to hold the wind back." His words struck a chord deep inside me. He was right. I had run away from Seattle. But here, on this cliff, I wasn't running anymore. I was standing my ground. This house wasn't a wall to keep the world out. It was a frame for a new picture, a new life, a new me, and I was the only designer I needed. Months melted into a year. The house on the bluff slowly took shape, a testament to slow, steady progress. It became a landmark of sorts in the small town. The locals would slow their cars as they drove past, watching the strange little house of glass, and would rise from the wild grass. I became a familiar sight, the city girl with sawdust in her hair and a grim determination in her eyes. I made a few tentative friendships at the local diner. Simple, uncomplicated connections based on the weather and the quality of the coffee. It was enough. I didn't follow Julian or Chloe on social media. I didn't ask my friends for updates. Their story was no longer my concern. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, I wondered if they had made it work, if their chaotic, passionate love had been enough to build a life on, or if, as I suspected, a relationship founded on the wreckage of another was doomed from the start. The house was finally finished in the early autumn, almost 2 years to the day after the wedding that never happened. The first night I spent there was stormy. The wind howled around the corners of the house, and rain lashed against the huge windows. I lit a fire in the fireplace, curled up in a simple armchair, and watched the storm rage over the ocean. The house groaned and creaked, but it held firm. I felt completely, utterly safe. I was alone, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't lonely. I was whole. The next morning, the sky was washed clean. Sunlight streamed into the living room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I made coffee and took it out onto the porch, breathing in the crisp, salty air. This was my home, not a perfect, curated space, but a real, resilient shelter I had built with my own hands. It was a home designed to withstand storms. I decided it was time to go back, not to live, but to visit, to close the final chapter. Seattle looked the same, but I was different. The city's grayness no longer felt oppressive. It just felt familiar. I met Sarah for lunch at our old favorite spot. She hugged me so tightly, I thought my ribs would crack. She looked at me, her eyes scanning my face, my calloused hands, the new sense of peace that I wore more comfortably than any of my old clothes. "My God, Ellie," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You look strong." "I am," I said, and I was surprised by the simple certainty of the words. She caught me up on the news. Julian's second book had finally come out. It was a dark, brooding novel about a man torn between two women, about the destructive nature of passion and the suffocating comfort of stability. It had received moderate, polite reviews, technically proficient, but emotionally hollow. One critic had written, "Sarah had saved the clipping for me." "And them?" I asked, my voice steady. Sarah sighed, stirring her iced tea. "It was a train wreck, just like you'd expect. They lasted about 6 months. From what I hear, it was a constant storm of drama, jealousy, and accusations. Turns out, the thrill of the affair doesn't translate well to the reality of paying bills and taking out the trash. She left him, moved to New York. I think he tried to get her back, but she was done." I felt a surprising lack of emotion at the news. No satisfaction, no pity, no anger. It was like hearing about the lives of characters in a book I had read a long time ago. Their story had run its course, and it had nothing to do with me anymore. Before I left Seattle, there was one last thing I had to do. I drove to the house, the one we were supposed to live in. A new family lived there now. A child's bicycle lay tipped over on the lawn. and colorful chalk drawings covered the walkway I had so carefully designed. A new story was being written within those walls. I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile, and drove away. A few weeks after I returned to my house on the bluff, a package arrived. It was a small, padded envelope with a Seattle postmark. There was no return address, but I knew who it was from. Inside was a single copy of Julian's new book. Tucked inside the front cover was a handwritten letter. My first impulse was to throw it in the fire, but my curiosity, a gentler, more detached version of what I'd felt before, won out. I sat on my porch, the afternoon sun warming my face, and I read his words. It was not a plea for me to come back. It was not an excuse. It was, for the first time, something that felt like an honest confession. He wrote about his own weakness, his fear of failure, his romanticized notion that pain and turmoil were necessary for great art. He wrote that in trying to have both worlds, he had lost the only one that had ever felt real. He admitted that he had confused comfort and stability with a lack of passion, when in reality, the home I had built for him was the one place he had ever been able to create anything of value. I destroyed the best thing in my life because I was a coward. He wrote at the end, I thought I needed a muse to write, but I've learned that a writer doesn't need a muse. He needs a foundation. You were my foundation, Ellie, and I demolished it. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand. I hope you've built a new house, a better one. I hope you are happy. I folded the letter and put it down. I looked out at the ocean, at the endless expanse of blue meeting the sky. He was right. I had built a new house, a much better one, and I was happy. My happiness wasn't the giddy, perfect happiness I had once chased. It was something quieter, deeper, and infinitely more resilient. It was the happiness of a woman who had walked through the fire and learned she was fireproof. I picked up the book and the letter. I walked inside to the fireplace, where a few embers still glowed from the morning's fire. I held them over the hearth for a long moment. I could burn them. I could erase this final piece of him from my life. It would be a dramatic, symbolic gesture, but I didn't. Burning them felt like an act of anger, and I wasn't angry anymore. Keeping them felt like holding on, and I had already let go. Instead, I walked to a box in the closet, a box labeled Old Blueprints. It was filled with past projects, designs for lives that weren't mine. I placed the book and the letter inside, and I closed the lid. It wasn't a part of my present, but it was a part of my past. It was the blueprint for a house that was never built, and its failure had taught me everything I needed to know to build the one I was living in now. I went back out to the porch and sat down, lifting my face to the sun. Liam was coming to visit next week. Our friendship had slowly, naturally, blossomed into something more, something as quiet and steady as the tides. We were building something new, without blueprints, one day at a time. Maybe it would last forever, maybe it wouldn't. I had learned not to plan too far ahead. The wind picked up, coming in off the ocean, and I didn't flinch. I let it blow through my hair, cool and clean. I was no longer afraid of the storm. I had a home to keep me safe, and I had built it myself.